Alright, another they ask questions, I answer kind of thing. It's the Brett Keane. So he does some follow-ups, and yes, I'll play along and continue the conversation and attempt to explain um, distinctions and differences and where it all goes sideways in terms of our perceptions of reality, definitions. See if I can set you straight. Wink, wink. Okay, anyway, so let us continue.
There's some ways that you describe things that I don't know if I would so much say bother me, but you seem to have a problem with the concept of God.
Well, I mean, I have a problem with things that aren't, there's no evidence for them. I mean, and then the God of traditional religions, I would argue, is these gods are, they're more obviously creations of human beings in the sense that they have all these human frailties. They are bigots, and their ethics are really stupid and not very complex. And the whole idea of having a conversation with a creator who's some kind of superior, I mean, that comes from a world where, the rich literally owned people. And as a free man, I find it quite offensive even to think about having an owner who will tell me what my role is and what my life is. I think the obligation is, if there was a God, he'd have an obligation to explain it to me, to make an argument, not to be a dictator. Dictator's now an ugly word. In the past, it was a fact of life. But I don't think intelligent people shall be dictated to by figments of other people's imagination.
At least in the magical sense, as you would probably put it.
Or, yes, the entirely made-up sense.
But what would you say to God as an energy processor, or...
Well, you're already in trouble, because if you're going to have the God as being an intelligence, then there's no way you can mechanically create that. The way nature has revealed itself is that things go from a simpler, cruder function to a more complex function. So in the sense, you throw rocks into a pile, and every now and then you get a rock to sit on top of a rock, and then you might have a chance to get another rock on top of a rock on top of a rock. But it doesn't happen the other way around. It didn't start off as 3 rocks on top of each other. So intelligence isn't something innate. The innate system is crude and unintelligent. So in my opinion, evolution could be appropriately, the appropriate synonym or definition for evolution would be unintelligent design. It's a crude, simple process. It's a dogfight, and you can pretend that's a ballet, but it's not.
A technological entity. You describe
an entity, again, of creation, when everything about creation indicates very simple physical forces, laws of nature. Light moves between point A and point B in a straight line, kind of things, at a certain locked speed. The constants of nature are the only entity, and there's no evidence of anything intelligent either in the design, the initial barfing, and the progressive decomposition of the slop, composition of the slop.
humans as being biological machines. You describe us as processors.
Yes, and we're processing like a meat processor, like a crocodile. So my fundamental argument is that it's a bug planet. Everything's essentially a bug. And that's the mechanical design, is consumption, reproduction, addiction, and parasitism crap. That's what it's made out of, those functions. And the system isn't have any intelligent guider. There's no adult going, Now play nice, play fair. No, there's no system like that. It's a crude, brutal system of competition. And on an island planet, that competition essentially has created carnage. Kind eating kind and such.
You describe us as having this ability and this information. You pointed at your finger and you said there's 600 and blah 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 million bits of information and data.
Yeah, well, I didn't say information and data. That's not my jargon, because I don't think information exists in the physical world. Information is a word you reserve for the modeling world. So when you model reality, it's information and knowledge. It's not information and knowledge when it's in the physical reality. So it's not quite the way I was saying it, but what I was trying to say in that argument is that it is the density of the system. There's so much of it that's what overwhelms our capacity to see the crudeness of it. So the volume confuses us, and we end up seeing complexity in a system that's very simple.
Just within the fingertip alone. Now, if you actually see us as machines, and you see that we have a purpose, we have a function.
Well, say again, I was kind of clear about the word purpose being not very useful because it implies two different kinds of things, function and intention. So again, a function only has service to a system. So, you know, the wheel on the steamroller has a function to smash the asphalt. We have a function and a limited role as in the sense of our creation. We're created to be very good bugs, to consume and reproduce and get addicted and parasite efficiently. And so the fact that we're functional for that limited purpose of surviving a gladiator war has nothing to do with having a purpose in any kind of sense of would I intentionally make a dog fight? Would I make dogs and then would I make them fight? I wouldn't.
And that our brain actually intrinsically works in order to keep us alive, but also to perceive.
Well, I use the word works in the sense that it models reality. So it accurately locates trees in the environment. It locates friend and foe. It gives us accurate data about what's in the environment. At least it can give us accurate data. Obviously, our senses are doing a very good job. Our imagination is where things start to break down because people start seeing invisible gods and boogeymen and obstacles, and they can't get over something. They see a Nazi behind every person with any intention in the world or something. They create false elements in reality, in their perception. They project mush onto a functioning sense organ. So they break our vision by giving us fables and fairy tales as reality, which isn't a good idea. I have to see if this is something. Wait. Wait.
Our reality and perception around us, then why would you have a hard time being convinced that there could be a more powerful processor?
Again, like I said, I would say it doesn't have an origin. It would have to evolve. It would have to have an abiogenesis, come from chemistry, evolve, and such a god wouldn't be a lonely god, okay, if that happened. So if gods were created somewhere in the universe, they wouldn't be created as a single entity, first off, by any conceivable natural process. So there's no conceivable natural process that would create one god, because it would have to evolve, and evolution requires mutation and change, and it requires competition, so it requires kind of a bunch of other animals to be competing with, or other gods to be competing with, So there's just no rational way to have a natural mechanism that creates a super intelligence. And as I've stated, I don't see any evidence of super intelligence. I see exactly the opposite in all these descriptions of gods. I see them as silly, egomaniacal dictators that don't seem to have any kind of decency or reasonable ethics. I don't see any super intelligence in any of God's formation of his law. I mean, he can't make a good argument, and he obviously doesn't do anything in the world to fix what's broken. So he seems pretty lame in terms of his power, and lamer in terms of his purpose.
That is actually out there, like that of a great computer that is producing the bits and the information.
Well, anything that would be called a great computer or a great knowledge base or a great thinker wouldn't be afraid of an argument, and certainly wouldn't engage with things it created or things it interacted with in an arrogant manner. It would see no function in having its ring kissed or its toes manicured or whatever. It wouldn't create servants. Servants is for an ignorant beast, not an intelligent beast. An intelligent beast doesn't want servants.
I mean, the reason why I point this out to you, Gary, I'm not talking about hocus pocus, old man on a cloud with the cane shut. I'm talking about an act.
You're talking about Bugs Bunny without somebody who drew him. You're talking about the creation of a character or a thing without a creative process. So all I'm saying is you're going to say it's infinitely intelligent and it's infinitely existing. I'm going to argue that that doesn't work because it would go insane, because it had to spend an eternity in its own thoughts. And if you spend an eternity to make an imperfect creation, that implies a bit of stupidity. I mean, if you have an infinite amount of time to think about what you're doing, and then you create a completely silly system where you seduce some ignorant woman into doing something, understandably wrong, have an accident, not appreciate the jeopardy she was putting the human race in, and then punish all women for eternity for it. That's just insipidly silly as a theme of a narrative. The story starts off stupid and it only gets stupider.
Actual sentient thinking, and I know you don't like the word mind, but some kind of designer or programmer behind all this information.
Well, again, I'm just saying there's no evidence of anything smart in the design. There's no evidence of fairness built into nature or the structure of civilization. There's just no evidence of anything articulate, graceful, or beautiful in most of what human beings do. So I might think my argument that we're fancy bugs is a lot more of an accurate description of our circumstance than this argument that we're divine creations. I think there's a lot more evidence for the bug argument than there is for the divine argument. We're a lot more bug-like than perfect.
Why is it so hard to accept, since science as well as reality dictates that any processing unit, any type of machine, any type of system with
yes, requires somebody to build it and design it and engineer it. So your God is still without a creator. And so all you're doing is you're saying life is fancy and interesting, therefore something must have made it. And then you're saying, but the thing that made it is more complicated and more sophisticated, and yet you don't say it had to be made by something. So unless you're arguing that God evolved somewhere, is that what you're arguing? That the God did evolve and he killed all the other gods to become the only God, and that God would be worth worshiping? The mass murderer God?
logic and rationality and purpose and function to it, the only observable evidence we ever have had of any of these things existing is because something alive and intelligent created it.
Well, again, that's most of the fancy stuff on Earth didn't have anything to do with anything intelligent creating it. And I don't want to have to go back to the scientific argument, though. But I mean, I'm just saying, you know, you're just displaying your ignorance, because we know how fancy happened. I mean, the fossil record may not contain a bunch of human missing links, but it's got a ton of other animal missing links. And there's lots of fossil evidence for the progression of organisms. And the fact that, you know, whales once walked on Earth is a fact. I mean, you can't deny the obvious truth of the vestigial hip bones and leg bones, and you know they're there, and there's no explanation for them. You just can't pretend that God deliberately put them there just to fuck with our heads. It makes no sense. It's not a sensible argument. You have to explain that stuff, and you don't have an explanation. So we know that sophistication was something that developed over billions of years on planet Earth.
Can you think of one single time, for example, I know that you have a lot of books. I know that you've enjoyed reading.
No, you don't know that. I don't have a lot of. I have some National Geographics, and I have some Time Life books, and I have some psychology books, and I have some physics books, but I don't have a lot. Nowhere near, you know. I have 100 books, maybe 200 books. So, I mean, if you count the National Geographic, say they got a few hundred, but most of that isn't all that, you know. I mean, it's, you know, profiles of different little civilizations and such. Not terribly interesting.
Reading throughout your entire life. Find the least complicated book in your house. Find something that's only got 3 pages long.
Now, you already did this with Christopher 7, so I don't know what this has to do with anything, but go ahead, play along.
Find a brochure, perhaps, with just 2 or 3 pages of information.
Here's the, just, you know, here's the conditions and what does that say? Agreements for my lease, for my cottage. Yeah, okay, there, it's 1 page.
And then I want you to explain to me, do you believe that it's possible that that little bitty pamphlet could come into existence all by itself? Or you?
Well, again, it didn't, so I don't know what your argument is. So you're arguing that there's something on this planet that came into existence all by itself, that this flashlight came into existence all by itself. No, this was created by human beings. Human beings were created over a long process. So, again, what's your argument? I mean, you just don't believe in evolution. Okay, I get that that's what you're saying, but I'm saying I can't see any rational sense in that, because we know it happened. The facts are undeniable, and you want to pretend they don't exist. Okay, go ahead and pretend that, but that's not how it happened. You know, human beings 1 million years ago existed in an ignorant form. They had a few little tiny changes in their brain function. They sacrificed some sense data for language acquisition, and then once they acquired the ability to do a little bit of language, and that was useful, the funny catch was the little bit was enough to do a lot of language. And once they got to a few thousand words, they were off to the races in terms of being able to do this communication thing and to verbalize and to conceptualize. And that's where all of the stuff we made came from, is the knowledge acquisition. I mean, that's a proof of history. I mean, are you going to deny that 100 years ago it was a different world? The airplanes didn't fly as fast or as well. You know, I go back 200 years ago, you didn't have electric lights. You didn't, I mean, are you denying the existence of human progress? Do you think it just poofed into existence? Or do you understand that it happened because of knowledge acquisition? That these things were all built one step at a time. None of these things poofed into existence.
Been gradually, millions over time, where it's coherent and the information is laid out, telling you what the purpose and the function of the pamphlet is. Take the most least complicated literature that you have over there And can you possibly tell me if there's any probability whatsoever that that information can come into existence in such a way?
I mean, this argument, again, you don't see how fallacious it is as an argument when you sit there and argue for something you're not accounting for with your solution. You're claiming to have a solution that doesn't answer this question. So you're answering the question with an answer that has the same vulnerability. Your God has to be more complicated than the things you're claiming it created is. And you're saying your God poofed into existence. Why couldn't I just say it poofed? If you can say the much more complicated thing poofed. Why couldn't I say this flashlight poofed into existence? If you can say a God can poof into existence. I mean, it's such a fallacy to use a question, an answer that has the same vulnerability as the question you're supposedly answering.
Where it would be exactly like the pamphlet did, without an intelligent life form putting it together.
Yeah, well, again, what is intelligence? And I'm just saying, I've sort of made this argument that's built out of these steps, and it's progressive, and we see that. I mean, the recorded history is undeniable. The fact is that 500 years ago, it was there was less information available to human brains, and 1,000 years ago, there was even less information available to human brains. Alright, camera battery ran out, so I don't know, try to pick up somewhere near where I left off, something about the idea that this progressive knowledge thing. You can see it in the historical record. There's no evidence that anything poofed, and this whole idea of making an argument from that some of this somehow requires a God for any of this to be made. First off, that's a nonsense argument. We certainly did evolve, and even if we didn't, even if we did somehow just poof, you don't explain something creating us to remove the poof problem when the thing you're saying created us poofed, came from nothing. That doesn't make any sense. Doesn't answer the question.
Together. Or at least a life form in general. I'm going to give you one more question that is based kind of around the same thing I'm getting at here. You clearly believe in evolution. I got nothing wrong with that. I don't have any kind of hatred or anything against evolution at all. I just see that there's a lot of questions that are still unanswered.
No, there really aren't. So I'm just saying that I'm just going to argue that if you really do read the books, Stephen Jay Gould would be a good one to really understand why evolution hides some of the evidence from us. There's lots of reasons, but I'm just saying the amount of evidence and the volume of evidence in the record is huge.
I could be convinced of it if I talked with someone long enough or continue to do research, which I have been. What I have to ask you is, you believe that computers, and you said this in your own video, are made up of chemicals. All this information is put together through chemistry. So my question for you is, if you...
Well, and I'd also argue that chemistry is physics. So I just don't know what that has to do with anything. I'm just saying that the physics is the origin of everything. Those laws are the laws of the universe. And everything else is a byproduct of interaction governed by those laws. And that's what chemistry is. Chemistry evolves. And the whole point is that chemistry evolved into a replicating molecule. And then the replicating molecule evolved into life forms.
If you and I were to go into a room filled with computers, the most advanced technological computers of all times, take a baseball bat, destroy them all into little fragments and pieces, and then assemble them all into piles, like you would if you were sweeping trash into a dustbin. We take the particles and the properties and the chemistry that is all laying there, and we throw it into a big hefty bag. Do you believe that if you were to shake up the bag long enough, that at some point in time, you or I could reach into the bag and pull out even the simplest of technology.
Well, you wouldn't have to shake up the bag. Evolution wasn't a shooking up bag. But yeah, obviously there has to be an environment that's safe enough. You could argue that chemistry can't make complex compounds in highly radioactive environments or in certain kinds of environments. The chemistry can't get big. So there's limitations on size that are based on heat and radiation in different conditions. And so you have to have the right conditions on, like, say, the surface of a less than blazing sun in the right amount of gravity and the right amount of certain conditions have to exist for chemistry to create very complex molecules. So, we see that sort of. You see that when it's too cold, then it just ends up being methane and, very simple chemistry. And then when it's too hot, it goes the other way because everything melts. It's got to be just right.
Either that of a toaster oven, either that of a Game Boy, either that of an iPad, an MP3 player.
Yeah, well, it depends on what you're talking about, how you're breaking something up and how you're recreating it. Again, there's a huge number of dead living parts on the surface of the earth. It's covered in layers and layers of organic matter, and yet new life forms don't just pop up. They don't just poof. So again, if you understand what evolution is a very slow process, and it happens in this, pieces at a time. So yeah, if you want me to answer your question in the sense that as long as you have to change the rule of your question a little bit, because obviously to make the plastics and to make the metals and to make the silicon, all those things had to be fused together through a very intricate process, and you broke them in ways that don't have to do with the way they were made. You didn't go backwards in evolutionary time to create some lesser product. You took something that was made and then broke it. And that's a lot different than forcing you to go back to the crude elements and remake it again. So I'm saying evolution could happen again, okay, but you can't do it this backward way where you say, I'm going to make the Mona Lisa and then tear it into a million little shreds and then have it get repainted. It can't be repainted. You can't make a painting that way by putting little pieces of stuff together. We know how paintings are made, and you can't do it the way you want to make the painting. I can't make a painting by putting shreds of pixels in a bucket and shaking them up. It's not going to happen that way.
Do you think that we could pull out anything coherent if we shook the properties of hundreds of thousands of computers that we've destroyed? And don't make fun of me doing it.
Well, I'm just saying that you can use different metaphors or analogies. I've used the argument that you could take Yahtzee dice, and you can make the argument that there is a way to roll them where all of the dice will stand on top of each other with the number 5 on the top. But it's an incredibly perfect roll. It has to be exactly a certain way for that to possibly happen. You'd have to throw the dice down exactly a certain way, and certain exact conditions have to be met for that to happen. It's a perfect storm kind of argument. Everything has to be exactly a certain way for that unusual form to be created. So yes, complexity is not going to just be manufactured in the way you're saying. It won't just happen because you have the parts. You have to have the parts, and you have to have a mechanism that can put them together in the right order. And I'm just saying billions of years of evolution have put our genetic code together in the right order. It adds things and it subtracts tiny, tiny things at a time through that process. And you can't duplicate that by just shaking shit up in a jar.
And then say, oh, Brett's jerking off over there. That's just a fucking bag shake. That's not a cock shaker, right? Amendham, I will, from time to time, and not long time periods, but every once in a while I'm going to throw a video out at you, and if you feel like giving it your best shot and getting into philosophy and putting your stamp on it, I would love to do this with you. I've always been interested, there was a reason why I used to go into your hangouts in the past. Even though you were rough on me sometimes, I actually enjoyed spending time with you and listening to what you had to say, even if you didn't have that mutual respect for me.
Yeah, well, like I said, it's not a personal thing. I mean, I'm just in this for the battle, so to speak, for ideas, and But yeah, I have limited patience. I can't be bothered investing in people who are belligerently illogical. So I'm just saying, yes, if you can appreciate a logical argument, and then you'll be somewhat responsive to that logical argument. Like I said, so I'll ask a question to you. Do you see the fallaciousness of claiming a creator to explain something unusual or something complicated existing, and yet you claim the creator didn't need a creator? Your God has no conceivable parentage, and yet you're talking about complexity here in our human world not having proper parentage in a way. Do you see the irony of that you can't really